The moment Luis Ortega stepped out of the van alone, watching his wife and children's terrified faces through the tinted windows as it drove away, he understood that $15,000 had bought not safe passage but the complete destruction of his family. They were supposed to cross together. That was the entire point of paying triple the normal rate, to ensure the family stayed united through the journey. The smugglers had sworn on their mothers' graves, shown photos of happy families reunited in Los Angeles, provided testimonials from satisfied customers who'd used their special family route. Now Luis stood on a dirt road somewhere in California, the van's taillights disappearing into desert darkness. His 7-year-old daughter's screams still echoing in his ears as they pulled him out alone. The smuggler's last words played on repeat. "You go first. We'll bring them right after. Trust us." But trust was a luxury that had died the moment that van door slammed shut. The journey to that moment of separation had begun 6 months earlier in San Pedro Sula, Honduras, in the small restaurant Luis owned with his brother. Business had been good until the local gang decided it needed new revenue streams. The weekly extortion payments started small, but grew like cancer. When Luis couldn't pay 1 week, they burned his delivery truck. When he went to the police, they burned his house. The final straw came when they started watching his children walk to school. His daughter Sophia, 7 years old with her mother's eyes and his stubborn streak. His son Carlos, 5, who still believed his father could protect him from anything. The gang's message was clear: pay join or lose everything. Luis chose option 4, run. His wife Maria understood without explanation. They'd both grown up in Honduras, knew how these stories ended. Within a week, they'd sold everything sellable, borrowed from every relative, scraped together $20,000. Their entire life converted to cash that fit in a small bag. Enough for the journey and a start in America, where Maria's cousin had promised work in her cleaning business. The first attempt to leave legally had failed. Visa applications denied without explanation, the American embassy's windows reflecting their desperate faces as they were turned away. The legal route was closed to people like them. Working class, no property to guarantee return, too many reasons to stay in America once they arrived. The system was designed to keep them out. So they turned to the shadows, to the network of smugglers who promised what governments wouldn't provide: a chance. Through whispered conversations and careful introductions, they found Los Hermanos, the brothers, an organization that specialized in family crossings. More expensive than solo trips, but supposedly safer, more reliable. They understood that families needed different handling than single men seeking work. The main contact called himself Raul, though Luis doubted it was his real name. Professional, well-dressed, he met them in a decent hotel rather than a back alley. He spoke of routes and safe houses, of contacts in California who'd help with jobs and housing. Most importantly, he guaranteed the family would never be separated. They had vehicles designed for families, safe houses with separate rooms, female associates to help with children, everything designed to minimize trauma for the young ones. $15,000, $5,000 for each family member, with a promise that children under 10 traveled at half price. Raul showed them photos on a tablet. Families at Disneyland, children in American schools, parents working legitimate jobs. Success stories, he called them. Your story could be here next year. They signed nothing, of course. Everything was verbal, trust-based, enforced by reputation rather than law. Luis handed over $10,000 as a down payment, would pay the rest upon reaching Los Angeles. Raul gave them a date, a location in Guatemala, instructions to tell no one. Even extended family couldn't know their exact plans. The journey north was a blur of buses and cheap motels. Guatemala to Mexico, careful to avoid checkpoints. Staying in safe houses that were sometimes just crowded apartments where desperate people counted days and dollars. Sophia thought it was an adventure at first, until the novelty wore off, and she started asking when they'd have their own home again. Carlos clung to Maria, sensing the adult fear his parents tried to hide. In Tijuana, they met the rest of their crossing group. 2 other families, one from El Salvador, one from Guatemala, and a few single travelers. Maybe 15 people total, a manageable number. The safe house was actually safe, with locks that worked and female associates who helped with the children. Luis began to believe they'd chosen right, that the extra money had bought real protection. The plan was explained in detail. They'd cross at a remote section of the California border where surveillance was minimal. Vehicles would be waiting on the American side. The journey to Los Angeles would take 6 hours, with stops at established safe houses. Everyone would be delivered to their destinations within 48 hours. Families would stay together throughout. The night of crossing came quickly. They were loaded into vans in Mexico, driven to a spot where the border fence had convenient gaps. The walk across took less than an hour. Children carried when they tired. Everyone moving quietly through brush and over hills. Luis carried Carlos on his shoulders, feeling his son's small hands gripping his hair, trusting completely. On the American side, more vans waited as promised. This was where the organization showed coordination, timing, efficiency. They were loaded quickly. Families kept together. Luis, Maria, and the children in one van with the Salvadoran family. Air conditioning, water bottles, even snacks for the kids. Professional operation worth the money. For 2 hours, everything went according to plan. They drove through California darkness, avoiding main roads but making steady progress. The children slept, exhausted by the night journey. Maria held Luis's hand, allowing herself to imagine their new life. They'd made it. They were in America. The hardest part was over. Then the van stopped, not at a safe house or checkpoint, but on a remote dirt road. The driver made a phone call in English, too fast for Luis to follow with his basic vocabulary. Another van pulled up behind them. Men got out, faces hidden by darkness and baseball caps. The driver turned to the families with an expression that made Luis's stomach drop. New plans, he announced. Slight complication. They needed to split the group temporarily. Just logistics, nothing to worry about. The men would go in one van, women and children in another. They'd meet at the safe house in an hour. Standard procedure when there was heightened patrol activity. Luis protested immediately. They'd paid for family passage, guaranteed togetherness. The driver's expression hardened. This wasn't a negotiation. This was safety protocol. Did Luis want his family caught because he couldn't follow simple instructions? Did he want his children in detention centers? Or did he want to be smart, comply, and be reunited within the hour? Maria gripped his arm, her eyes wide with fear. But what choice did they have? They were on a dark road in a foreign country, surrounded by men who'd shifted from helpful to threatening in seconds. Refusal meant abandonment at best, violence at worst. And the children were watching, already scared, needing their parents to make this okay somehow. Luis kissed his family goodbye, told Sophia to be brave, that daddy would see her soon, told Carlos to take care of mommy, told Maria everything would be fine, lying with his eyes while his mouth made promises. The other men were similarly separated, equally reluctant, equally powerless. He was directed to the second van with 3 other fathers. As he climbed in, he looked back to see Maria helping the children into the first van. Sophia pressed her face against the window, tears streaming. Carlos had gone silent, the way he did when truly frightened. Maria mouthed, "I love you," as the door closed. The van with his family drove away first. Luis watched its taillights disappear, feeling like his heart was being pulled out through his chest. The driver of his van made more phone calls, seemingly arguing with someone. Finally, they started moving, but in a different direction than the first van had gone. Luis asked where they were going. The driver ignored him, asked again more forcefully. The driver turned, revealing a pistol tucked in his waistband, and suggested silence would be smarter. The other men sat frozen, each processing their own version of the same horrible realization. They'd been separated for a reason, and it wasn't safety protocol. They drove for hours, far longer than any route to Los Angeles should take, out of California's valleys and into mountains, on roads that became increasingly remote. Luis tried to track their direction, but became hopelessly lost. His phone had no signal. The other men whispered prayers in Spanish and indigenous languages, but quietly, afraid of the driver's gun. Dawn came without a rival anywhere. They stopped at a rundown property that looked abandoned from the outside. The driver made them get out, herded them into a building that was set up as temporary housing. Mattresses on floors, a bathroom that barely functioned, bars on windows that suggested this wasn't the first group held here. That's when the truth emerged. The families had been separated because they were worth different amounts. Women and children, especially young ones, commanded higher prices in certain markets. Men were worth only their labor and not much of that. The organization would ransom them back to relatives or sell their labor to agricultural operations that didn't ask about documentation. Luis demanded to know where his family was. The driver, now joined by two other guards, laughed. How would he know? That was a different division of the operation. They'd been driven to their own destination, probably already sold or ransomed. If Luis had relatives who could pay, maybe he'd see them again. If not, well, America was a big country. People disappeared all the time. The rage that filled Luis was volcanic, but useless. He was outnumbered, unarmed, in an unknown location. The guards had clearly handled desperate fathers before. They kept their distance, hands on weapons, waiting for the fight to drain out of him. It did eventually, replaced by a despair so complete it felt like dying while still breathing. For 3 days, they kept him in that building with the other separated men, fed them barely enough, let them use the bathroom under guard, collected information about relatives who might pay ransoms. Luis gave them every contact he had, begged them to let him speak to Maria, to at least know his children were safe. They took his information and gave nothing back. On the 4th day, something changed. The guard became nervous, kept checking phones, speaking in urgent whispers. Luis heard fragments, something about raids, about the boss being arrested, about cutting losses. That night, they simply left, walked out, drove away, left the door unlocked and for desperate men to figure out their own fate. Luis ran. They all did, in different directions, each chasing their own ghosts. He found a road, flagged down a truck driver who took pity on his obvious distress, borrowed a phone, called every number he had for Maria, all disconnected, called her cousin in Los Angeles, who hadn't heard from them, called relatives in Honduras, who knew nothing. He made it to Los Angeles eventually, through the kindness of strangers and the informal network of immigrants who help without questions. Maria's cousin took him in, helped him search. They filed missing persons reports that went nowhere. How do you report people missing who were never supposed to be here? They checked detention centers, hospitals, morgues. Nothing. Weeks became months. Luis found work in construction, cash on the table, every penny saved for the search, or sent to relatives in Honduras in case Maria contacted them. He haunted immigrant advocacy groups, compared notes with others searching for vanished family members, learned that his story was common. Families separated, women and children vanishing into trafficking networks or forced labor situations. No way to trace people who'd entered invisibly. The not knowing was the worst part. Were they alive? Together? Had the children been sold separately? Was Maria looking for him too, or had they told her he was dead? Every crowd made him look for familiar faces. Every child's laugh made him turn, hoping to see Sophia. Every night brought dreams where he found them, only to wake alone in his cousin's spare room. He learned fragments from others with similar stories. The organization had been massive, operating across multiple states. When parts got busted, they scattered, abandoned their human cargo, or sold it quickly to other networks. The women and children were valuable enough to move. The men were often just released to fend for themselves. Some families had reunited through luck or ransom. Most hadn't. A year passed. Luis aged a decade. He learned enough English to navigate basic situations, but not enough to explain his pain to American authorities who might help. Worked 60-hour weeks. Sent money to Honduras in case Maria had somehow made it back. Checked social media obsessively for any sign of them, creating fake accounts to search for profiles that might be theirs under new names. The hope was killing him slowly. Every day without news made reunion less likely, but giving up felt like betrayal. Sophia would be 8 now. Would she even remember him? Carlos would be 6, probably forgetting his Spanish, forgetting his father's face. Maria would think he'd abandoned them, wouldn't know he'd never stopped searching. He met a woman at church who'd lost her husband the same way. Separated at the border, never reunited. She'd searched for 3 years before accepting he was gone, dead, departed, or disappeared into America's shadows. She told Luis about grief, about the particular torture of ambiguous loss. When someone dies, you mourn and eventually heal. When they vanish, you're trapped forever in the moment of separation. 2 years after that night on the dirt road, Luis still lived in Los Angeles, still worked construction, still searched, though less actively now. The trail was cold, the leads exhausted. He'd learned that $15,000 had bought not passage but tragedy, that the special family route had been specially designed to maximize profit by selling families in pieces. Sometimes new arrivals asked him for advice about crossing. He told them his story, watched their faces change from hope to horror. Some thanked him and reconsidered. Others convinced themselves their smugglers were different, their route safer, their families somehow protected from the mathematics of human trafficking. He understood. Desperation made its own logic. He dreamed about that moment constantly. The van door closing, Sophia's face in the window, Carlos clinging to Maria, the tail lights disappearing. In dreams, sometimes he fought harder, refused to be separated. Sometimes he chose differently, kept his family in Honduras despite the danger. Always he woke to the same reality. Alone in America, successful by some measures, destroyed by the only one that mattered. The worst part was the success stories. Other immigrants who'd made it with their families intact. Children in schools, parents working, the American dream achieved together. Luis would see them at church, in stores, living the life he'd paid $15,000 to achieve. He didn't begrudge them their happiness, but it highlighted his loss in ways that made breathing difficult. 3 years passed. Luis had permanent work, decent wages, even health insurance through a contractor who didn't ask about papers. He sent money to Honduras monthly, maintaining family connections in case Maria ever surfaced there. He'd stopped actively searching, but never stopped hoping. Carry his phone everywhere in case the call came. It never did. Instead, he learned to live with absence, to work, eat, sleep, and pretend that half his soul wasn't missing. To smile when coworkers complained about their children's behavior, while he would give anything to hear Sophia complain about homework. To nod when they discussed weekend family plans, while his weekends were empty expanses of time to be filled with overtime work. He thought about them constantly. Where were they? Still together. He hoped. Maria was strong, would protect the children with her life. Maybe they found their own path, created their own success stories somewhere in America's vastness. Maybe they searched for him too, but in the wrong places. Maybe they'd given up, moved on, built new lives that didn't include him. Or maybe worse things had happened. Things he couldn't let himself imagine without losing the thin grip on sanity that kept him functional. The trafficking networks that valued women and children. The agricultural camps where people disappeared. The 1,000 ways America consumed the vulnerable while pretending they didn't exist. Luis Ortega had paid $15,000 for a special family route that guaranteed they'd stay together. Instead, he'd been pulled from a van on a California dirt road while his family was driven into permanent darkness. The smugglers had kept their promise in the cruelest way possible. The family had stayed together. He was the one left behind. Now he lived in Los Angeles, legal in no way but present in every way that didn't matter. Working jobs Americans wouldn't do, living in shadows they wouldn't see, carrying a loss they wouldn't understand. Successful by immigrant standards, employed, housed, surviving, destroyed by human standards, alone, searching, forever frozen in that moment when the van door closed and his life split into before and after. $15,000. One dirt road. 2 vans going different directions. 3 people who were his entire world, vanished into America's darkness. That was the mathematics of family separation, where promises were weapons and trust was the deadliest currency, where special routes led to special cruelties, where fathers stood on dirt roads watching taillights disappear, not knowing they were seeing their families for the last time. Luis still waited for the phone to ring, still looked for faces in crowds, still carried photos no one asked to see, still loved people who might not exist anymore, at least not in any way he could reach. He was proof that you could survive separation but never recover from it, that you could make it to America and still lose everything that made the journey worthwhile. They'd said it was a family route. They'd lied. Or maybe they'd told the truth in the worst way. It was indeed a route designed specially for families. Designed to separate them, sell them in parts, maximize profit from love turned into leverage. Luis had been the only one taken that night. Taken to a different vehicle, a different destination, a different life than the one he'd paid for. His family had been taken too, just taken away. The distinction mattered only to him. The one left behind to parse the grammar of loss in a language he was still learning. 3 years later, he was still parsing, still learning, still alone on that dirt road, watching taillights disappear, waiting for a reunion that mathematics suggested would never come.